Okay, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about schemas, which is an important part of the cognitive perspective on personality. And if you take a look here, a schema is something that we use to organize information. Basically from childhood, we are not just the world around us is not just a series of independent objects. We kind of put things together. We try to create categories to help us understand the world. So, for example, this little drawing here represents the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, the schema for a little girl named Anna with 3 N's really is a schema that we all basically understand. We think about the Garden of Eden. What does the Garden of Eden have? It has Adam and Eve, of course. It has the grass. It has the flowers. It has, the tree with the apples, and it even has the little snake over there. Okay, and basically, schemas allow us to understand the world around us. They allow us to be able to put things into categories that we can all understand. You may have, for example, you may have a category for a restaurant. You may have a restaurant schema. Every time you walk into a restaurant, based on this schema, you already know what to expect. If it was the first time you've ever been to a restaurant, you may have, as a child maybe, you wouldn't have any idea what to expect. But most of us here, we have a lot of experience going to restaurants. So, as a result, it's a very familiar part of our. It's a familiar thing that we see. So even if we go into a new restaurant, we know it'll have tables, we know it'll have chairs, we know it'll have, wait staff. You know what kind of lighting it would have, the kind of smells we would have. All of that would fit into this complex, organized schema that we walk around with and we understand, even without walking into a restaurant. We know what the schema represents. Okay, so in our schemas, we might even have exemplars, for example. So let's go back to the restaurant schema. What might be an exemplar? A specific example of a restaurant. Well, maybe you think Applebee's or Chili's might be an exemplar for restaurants. Okay, and we'd also have an idea of what the general characteristics of restaurants are. We kind of know what they look like, again, as I was saying before, what we expect to see in them. And these are the general characteristics that restaurants have. So how do schemas come about? There are a couple of different ways to think about it. One of the ways it could be we might start with a general prototype, which would be that best example of what a restaurant might be. Okay, and maybe people have different ideas about what the prototype restaurant is. Maybe if you live in Memphis, the prototype restaurant would be a barbecue place. Maybe if you lived in Philadelphia, the prototype would be the classic Philly cheesesteak place. I don't know, but again, so the prototype is kind of the ideal level. What is the perfect example of a restaurant? Okay, and that is an example of prototype. On the other hand, you can also may have what is called a fuzzy set, which is not really necessarily the perfect example, but more or less a set of characteristics that would seem to fit in with that, and again, the idea of the fuzzy set, you think about the schema of birds. They talk about it in the textbook, right? And birds fly. They have wings. Okay. Birds have wings, but maybe not all of them fly. The ostrich doesn't fly. The penguin doesn't fly. That kind of thing. But they're nevertheless still birds. So in other words, it may not be a perfect example, but in other words, we have a fuzzy set. Yeah, well, most of them fly. That kind of thing. So that would be an example of a fuzzy set. And it's true, not all restaurants are going to be exactly the same. Some restaurants have a wait staff. Some restaurants have the hostess who seats you. Some restaurants have like the cafeteria style place, like the Piccadilly's, um, and maybe there are even different kinds of restaurants. There are fast food restaurants, that kind of thing, which you can kind of complicate the issue there. And there are unique restaurants that have special kinds of themes, maybe. So, bottom line is, we have these ideas about what restaurants are, and kind of they fit into that category here. Okay, with schemas, basically, schemas help us understand the world around us, because when we are when we see new information, when we learn new information, we don't just learn it independently. We incorporate everything we learn into the existing schemas that we have. Now, again, we develop our schemas as we grow, as we learn from mom and dad growing up. But the new information gets built into our already existing schemas. And they provide us with ready-made categories. Think about it, like even starting from childhood. Imagine a child seeing a car drive on the road, and the daddy says, "That's a car," and the child says, "Car." So then there's a truck that comes by, and the child says, "Car." And now the parent says, "No, that's a truck." So the child is essentially building a more elaborate schema to understand moving vehicles. So now again, what we're talking about is we have these from many different categories. Again, we talked about the restaurant schema, for example. We have a schema for a college classroom. You may even have schemas for online courses that you are now learning about. So all of these things are important for us to be able to understand the world around us. And we use these schemas to help fill in information that's lacking. And sometimes when we do that, we are essentially perceiving what we expect to perceive rather than perceiving reality. So in other words, it distorts our view of reality because we see reality through the image of our schemas rather than, as it is. Okay? And, we pay the type of attention we pay to an event is based on, on the particular schema. If we have, and again, the schema can really influence you, perhaps in ways that you don't expect. If you have a particular schema about, what, typical criminals are like, and then you watch a news show and you see somebody being arrested, well, maybe you'll fit that right into your schema. Oh, that fits my idea of what a criminal is. And maybe if it doesn't fit in, it says, well, maybe that's an exception. So we have essentially, we keep on building our schema. We keep looking for information now that fits our schema. So you can see how somebody can rely on stereotypes. Essentially, a stereotype about a particular group of people can be considered a type of schema. And essentially, you fit information into that schema, into that stereotype, and that's how you interpret people who belong to that particular group. Okay? And again, maybe we go to a restaurant, we may see something about that restaurant that really is different. Like maybe they have, at this restaurant, the kitchen is right in the middle, and we can see all the cooking going on, rather than in the back. I said, well, that's a different aspect of that restaurant. It violates our schema of what a restaurant looks like, and it stands out to us. Sometimes we will, sometimes we will kind of insert information into reality to kind of make it fit the schema. We might perceive things that aren't really there, just because those perceptions fit into our schema. So we alter our perception of reality to fit our schemas. And again, if you think about it, think about many ways in which we do this. Now, the schemas are very important for us. They help us remember information. They help us understand the world. We put things into categories. They help us deal with new information in an efficient way. But again, sometimes they can mess us up a bit. Okay? So, how is our memory organized? Our schemas essentially our schemas really just are organizations of our memories. I mean, our memories fit into those schemas, and we remember those schemas. We have semantic memories that are organized by what is we're meaning. Like, for example, a semantic memory might be knowing what an armadillo is. Okay, if you know what an armadillo is, that's an example of a semantic memory. An episodic memory represents a memory that that's based on an event that happened, like maybe your sweet 16th birthday party would be an example of an episodic memory. And again, we kind of organize our memories, the episodes in our lives and the meanings of different things. So you might know, for example, an armadillo is an animal. Maybe specifically it's a mammal, and maybe it lives down in the South and gets hit by cars a lot and stuff like that. These are things that kind of fit into our web, our schema of, where an armadillo fits in with, our schema of animals and mammals and whatnot. A script is a type of schema, and scripts deal with episodic events. Scripts deal with like a sequence of events. So you might have, for example, a script for what would happen on a first date. And you'd have the events that would happen. Maybe, you decide to meet at a particular bar, and maybe you get a drink, and you would talk about certain things, and then you'd say goodnight, and maybe you'd kiss, maybe you wouldn't. But basically, you'd go through these various sequence of events, and you'd expect that this particular event would follow this particular script. And again, you could even have a script for a restaurant, for going to a restaurant. You enter, you drive to the restaurant, you park your car, you open the door, you see the hostess there, and they ask you how many people you have, and you can go through all the step by step of all the events that would happen. Even without even walking into a restaurant, you have this script already in your memory. And this essentially helps you kind of be able to deal with these new events and deal with new episodes in your life. Okay? Now, there are certain types of schemas that are particularly important when it comes to personality. Now we have specific, social schemas that deal with, information that about the people that we are with, like types of people, gender roles, environment, social situations, social relations. And these are like these social cognitions. These are thoughts that we have about these particular people and the context that they're in. And we are kind of prepared for them all the time. But a particularly important schema is our self-schema. This is now, when we look at ourselves, when we see ourselves based on our schema of ourself, our self-schema. We have certain ideas about the type of person we are. Once you're saying you're this type of person or that type of person, you're talking in terms of a schema, because you are describing a category of type of person, and you're identifying yourself as belonging to this category. Therefore, this would be an example of a self-schema. And why is the self-schema very large and complex? Well, because we know ourselves better than we know anything else. So we understand, what types of situations we're likely to do this, and what types of situations we're likely to do that, and how we're different from this type of person and different from that type of person, and how we're under these types of circumstances we are more irritable, and on this types of circumstances we're more happy, that kind of thing. And we have really elaborate self-schemas. There's certainly emotion attached to it. We know the things that make us unhappy. We know the things that make us happy. We know the things that make us upset. And it kind of fits into our complex view of who we are. Okay? So how does this help us? We remember the events that happen to us in terms of our self-schema. And interestingly enough, one of the aspects of memory is that we are not just simply hitting rewind and playing when we are remembering events in our past. We are remembering events in our past based on our current conception of who we are right now. So in other words, we are seeing ourselves right now, and we are remembering ourselves in the past in light of who we are right now. So we're making a current construction of our past memories. As a result, it's based on our current self-schema that we are describing memory. So in other words, if you're having a bout of really low self-esteem, what kind of events might you be remembering from the past? You might be remembering events of failure from the past and bad things that happened to you. So it's a matter of realize that that's the color of the world you're looking through your self-schema as it is right now. Okay? And we remember those incidents that confirm our self-schema. So if we see ourselves as an honest person, we'll remember those times that we found money in the street and found a wallet in the street and returned it to the owner. But you might forget about the times where you steal candy from the candy store. These are because maybe that doesn't fit into your schema, your self-schema. Okay. So essentially, this really is important. Again, we often will use it as a default for strangers. We will kind of see other people, new people, we see it in light of how we see ourselves. In other words, how does this person compare to how we see ourselves? And if that person is close to our own self-schema, then maybe we found a lot of similarity. We found a connection there. And maybe we tend to like that person. And if we see that person is entirely different from our own self-schema, then we might have difficulty with that person. Another application of schemas is the concept of an entity or entity and incremental schemas. If you see yourself as having a particular talent, as having a particular natural ability, then this would be an example of an entity view. So think about your own self-schema. If you think about your self-schema as a terrific athlete, and you see this as a natural ability that you have, then that's the way you see yourself, and you're going to more or less go to essentially engage in activities that will confirm this particular aspect of your self-schema. So that's a way that you're not really doing this to improve yourself. You're more or less doing it to show that you have this ability. Okay? And you're going to pay attention to those pieces of information about yourself that confirm that consistent viewpoint, the idea that you have this ability and you've had it for a long time and you expect to have it, continue to have this. Okay? And if you have a failure that kind of disrupts this boy, I thought I was good at this and I just bombed, that can have a pretty damaging effect. That might make you want to give up. Okay? So again, think about it academically. If you think of yourself as a really, really, really smart person and you bomb an exam, well, maybe if you see yourself having that entity viewpoint, that failure is not going to do good for you. You're going to get really distressed about it, or you're more or less being so dismissive of it and find an excuse for why it happened to you that it doesn't disrupt your self-schema of really being a smart person. Now, what if you had an incremental view that's related to your self-schema? If you see yourselves as your abilities is not really just this static thing, but really is something that changes with experience. So you see yourself as a smart person, but you see yourself as having the ability to get better at what you're doing. And the idea of what you want to do is you want to see if you can improve yourself in this case. So think about academically. You fail an exam. If you have an incremental self-schema, you might say, all right, I failed this exam. I need to work harder this time. I need to change my ability. I need to increase it and be able to do this. And you're going to pay attention to circumstances in which you got better at things, in which you showed change. So overall, I think in many ways we have a combination of these in terms of our self-schema. Remember, our self-schema is very complicated. So we see a combination of things that we have, our abilities that are unchanging, but we also have the abilities that get better with experience. Maybe it's a combination of these. Hopefully, academically, I would like to see you have an incremental schema, realizing that there's always room for improvement. There's always ways in which you can learn more and become better at what you do. Okay. All right, I think we'll stop there, and next time we'll start talking. We'll talk a little bit about the next chapter on self-regulation and those kind of systems.